Hey guys, welcome back. Tonight, we're not diving into the tragic downfall of some inbred royal, at least not directly. Instead, we're going to do something a little different, but equally cozy. We're going to talk about beds. Yes, literal beds. Because when you think about it, history isn't just wars, plagues, and questionable dynastic marriages. History is also about how people actually lived and slept. So, if you're already in bed, perfect. If you're still sitting at your desk like some medieval scribe chained to a manuscript, maybe tilt that chair back a little. Dim the lights, pretend you're a Tudor noble trying not to get fleas. And let's float our way through the surprisingly long and weird history of human bedding. Now, at first glance, the history of beds might not sound thrilling. But remember, people have always been obsessed with comfort. Even the most terrifying emperors and self-proclaimed god kings had to curl up somewhere at night. And, spoiler, for most of history, sleep was a pretty uncomfortable business. Let's start at the very beginning. Way before kings, queens, or IKEA. Way before fluffy duvets and memory foam that remembers all your secrets. Archaeologists think the first beds were nothing more than piles of grass or straw gathered into a vaguely comfy heap. Around 200,000 years ago, early humans in South Africa were already layering plant material on the ground to make a softer place to lie down. Very high-tech stuff. These weren't just any random weeds, though. Some of the grasses people used had natural insect-repelling qualities. Because yes, even back then, nobody wanted to share their bed with bugs. The first great war of mankind was apparently against mosquitoes. Of course, these straw mats didn't exactly scream luxury. Imagine the world's worst camping trip, but every night of your life. That was the vibe. But compared to the alternative, bare dirt crawling with things that wanted to bite you, it was basically a palace suite. As human societies developed, so did their bedding habits. In ancient Egypt, where everyone was busy building pyramids and pretending cats were small gods, people began raising their sleeping surfaces off the ground. Wooden frames, sometimes simple, sometimes decorated. If you were rich, you got a fancy carved bed. If you were poor, well, you probably stuck to the straw pile. Same old story. Interestingly, the Egyptians didn't necessarily think of beds as places for long, peaceful slumber. Sleep itself wasn't particularly sacred in their worldview. Beds were more of a multifunctional piece of furniture, a symbol of status, a place to rest, and occasionally the setting for death. Pharaohs, naturally, got special funeral beds, because why not lie dramatically even in the afterlife? Now, the Greeks and Romans, they took beds in some strange directions. Greek elite houses often had clines, which were couch-like beds. People would recline on them not just to sleep, but also to eat, drink, and philosophize about the meaning of life, which makes sense if you've ever tried to imagine Socrates sitting politely at a dinner table. Lying sideways with a goblet in one hand just feels on brand. The Romans copied this habit, because of course they did, and multiplied it by 10. Roman dining rooms were practically filled with beds. The triclinium was literally a set of 3 couches arranged around a table so everyone could lounge while eating. Hygiene wasn't really their strong suit, but comfort, they were working on it. As for actual sleeping, wealthy Romans used wooden bedsteads, often decorated with ivory or bronze. Mattresses were stuffed with wool, reeds, or feathers, which sounds nice, but let's be real. Most Romans lived in cramped apartments called insulae, where sleeping probably meant collapsing on a straw mattress shoved in a corner, listening to the neighbors arguing through paper-thin walls. So basically, the Roman lower classes invented the student dorm. Sliding over into medieval Europe, things get both better and worse. If you were a peasant, which, let's face it, most people were, you probably slept on a straw mattress called a pallet. And by mattress, I mean a sack stuffed with whatever you could find in the fields. It was lumpy, it smelled, and it had to be shaken out constantly because pests loved it. Sweet dreams. The wealthy, of course, got the fun stuff. They had huge wooden four-poster beds, often carved like Gothic cathedrals in miniature. These weren't just beds, they were social spaces. Medieval nobles would sometimes conduct business from their bed. Visitors were received there. Imagine your boss calling a meeting while half reclined on embroidered pillows. That was life in a castle. Oh, and let's not forget the curtains. Bed curtains were practical. They kept drafts out since castles were basically giant stone refrigerators. They also offered privacy because bedrooms were often communal. It wasn't unusual for servants or children to sleep in the same room, or even in the same bed. Forget the modern obsession with personal space. In medieval Europe, you just had to get cozy with whoever was around. Meanwhile, across the world, other cultures were doing things their own way. In Japan, people perfected the art of minimalism with the futon. These originated around the 10th century but became common later. Futons could be rolled out at night, then folded and stored during the day. Efficient, clean, and practical. Compare that to the European featherbed that weighed as much as a small horse and had to be beaten with sticks to get the lumps out. Honestly, Japan was winning on convenience. In China, there were Kong beds, brick platforms heated from below by flues connected to stoves. Basically built-in heated beds. The Chinese had underfloor heating centuries before Europe figured out central heating, which, considering how cold those northern Chinese winters could get, was genius. Let's float gently towards the Renaissance, where bed-making became a full-blown art form. Beds for the elite were insanely elaborate. We're talking towering canopies, velvet hangings, gilded carvings, and embroidery that took years to complete. The bed was no longer just furniture, it was a status symbol, the centerpiece of a room. When you walked into a Renaissance noble's chamber, the bed basically shouted, "Look how rich I am!" Also, "Please admire my silk curtains." And because these beds were so valuable, they often became heirlooms. Beds were specifically mentioned in wills. Imagine writing, "To my son, I leave the family castle. To my daughter, the ceremonial four-poster bed with gold thread embroidery and suspicious stains from 3 generations of questionable aristocrats." And it's also during this period that we start seeing the phrase, "the royal bedchamber," take on its symbolic power. Monarchs weren't just sleeping in their beds, they were displaying authority, receiving courtiers, even staging political rituals. Louis XIV of France, the so-called Sun King, turned waking up and going to bed into full-blown ceremonies, with nobles lining up just to watch him get tucked in, because apparently nothing says absolute monarchy than letting an audience see you in your nightgown. Now, I could keep going, and don't worry, we will. But let's pause here. Think about it. From straw piles on cave floors to gilded four-posters guarded by etiquette rules, beds tell us a lot about human history. They reflect status, culture, and the eternal human desire to avoid waking up with back pain. So, in the next part, we'll drift forward into the 17th and 18th centuries. This is when bedding really starts to shift toward what we'd recognize today. More comfort, more hygiene, more drama, obviously, because history never lets us just sleep peacefully.
All right, so we left off with the Renaissance. Silk curtains, velvet hangings, nobles practically living inside their beds like hermit crabs with trust funds. By the 1600s and 1700s, beds were still symbols of power, but they were also starting to look more like the modern versions we'd actually recognize. Let's ease into this by talking about feather beds, because by this point, straw just wasn't cutting it for anyone with money. The wealthy wanted comfort, they wanted softness, and they wanted bragging rights. Enter the feather mattress. Now, feather beds were basically giant sacks stuffed with goose or duck feathers. Luxurious, yes. Practical, not so much. These things were heavy, like need 3 servants and a chiropractor heavy. And they had to be beaten and fluffed constantly. Imagine waking up every morning and having to smack your bed with sticks just to make it usable again. Sounds cozy. But if you were a rich 17th century aristocrat, you didn't care. You wanted feathers. The more feathers, the better. In fact, feather beds became so valuable that they were passed down as inheritances. Families squabbled over them in wills.
Forget the family jewels. People were out here fighting for grandma's mattress because a giant sack of feathers was worth more than most farmhouses. Now, this is also the period when beds became increasingly tied up with privacy, or, well, the lack of it. Let me explain. In most of Europe, bedrooms weren't these private sanctuaries we think of today. They were semi-public spaces. Servants wandered in and out, children slept nearby, guests might crash in the same room or the same bed. That was normal. In fact, bed sharing was an everyday reality. Travelers often had to share beds with strangers at inns. Entire families might sleep in one bed for warmth. There are endless complaints in diaries about being stuck with snoring bedfellows, or worse, those who kicked. It wasn't about intimacy. It was about survival, convenience, and the fact that mattresses were expensive. So yes, if you lived back then, chances are you spent a good portion of your life sleeping cheek to cheek with people you barely tolerated. Of course, royalty lived by different rules. Their beds weren't just for sleeping, they were theaters of politics, and no one understood this better than Louis XIV of France, the guy who basically turned going to bed into a Broadway production. Louis XIV, the Sun King, he loved beds, not necessarily for comfort, but for the endless opportunities to demonstrate his importance while lying down. His daily routine included two ceremonies, the lever, or rising, and the coucher, or going to bed. And yes, these were public events. Nobles lined up to watch Louis wake up in the morning, get dressed by attendants, and eventually climb out of his very fancy bed. Then at night, there was another ceremony for tucking him in. Imagine being one of the most powerful men in Europe and having people literally applaud you for pulling up the covers. That's how Louis lived. And if you think it sounds awkward, remember that nobles actually competed for the privilege of handing him his nightshirt. It was considered a great honor because nothing screams prestige like helping a grown man undress. And Louis's bed itself? A spectacle. Gilded, draped in embroidered fabric, positioned so that courtiers could stand around and admire it. In Versailles, the king's bedchamber was basically the heart of the palace. It symbolized not just rest, but royal power. The Sun King slept, and therefore, France revolved around him. Elsewhere in Europe, things weren't quite as theatrical, but beds were still central to power and ceremony. In England, monarchs also conducted business from their beds, receiving ministers, signing documents, sometimes even holding court sessions without bothering to get up. And when a king or queen died, it often happened in their bedchamber, surrounded by witnesses. Beds weren't private retreats, they were public stages. But let's bring things back to the everyday people. For them, life in bed was less glamorous. Peasant families in the 17th century often shared a single mattress, usually stuffed with straw or rags. Sometimes they slept in alcove beds, built into the wall with wooden shutters that could be closed for warmth and a little privacy. Imagine a cupboard you crawl into every night. Cozy, yes, but also a bit coffin-adjacent. In Scandinavia, box beds were especially popular. These were enclosed wooden beds, almost like little closets, with sliding doors. Families could pack themselves in like sardines, conserving body heat through brutal winters. So if you've ever felt cramped in a modern bunk bed, just know your ancestors would laugh at your complaints. Let's also talk about hygiene, or rather, the lack of it. Beds in this period were notorious for breeding grounds for lice, fleas, and bedbugs. Curtains, feather mattresses, and heavy quilts made perfect hiding spots for pests. People might bathe once a month if they were lucky, so you can imagine the state of the sheets, which, by the way, weren't washed very often because laundry was backbreaking work. Travelers frequently complained about the conditions of inn-beds, which were often crawling with creatures. There are countless accounts of people carrying their own sheets or even sleeping fully clothed to avoid direct contact. So yes, even if you were wealthy enough to afford a feather bed, chances are you still woke up scratching. Meanwhile, over in Asia, sleeping traditions were following their own paths. In Japan, the futon continued to spread in popularity. Futons were not only convenient, but also more hygienic than bulky mattresses. They could be aired out in the sun during the day, reducing pests. Minimalism wasn't just aesthetic, it was practical.
In China, the Kong bed remained a staple, especially in the colder north. Families gathered on these heated brick platforms, sleeping side by side. The Kong bed wasn't just for sleeping, it was for living. People ate, socialized, and even worked on them. Imagine your entire daily life condensed on a giant warm platform. Honestly, not the worst setup. And in India, the charpai, or rope bed, was common. This was a wooden frame strung with woven ropes, creating a springy surface, lightweight, breathable, and perfect for hot climates, plus easy to repair. The charpai was so effective that variations of it spread across the world, eventually influencing European designs. By the 18th century, bedding was inching closer to modernity. In Europe, cotton and linen sheets became more common thanks to increased global trade. People began layering sheets, blankets, and quilts in ways we'd recognize today. Bed frames grew more standardized, and for the wealthy, mattresses got thicker, softer, and filled with better materials. But don't be fooled. Even the fanciest beds of the 18th century were still uncomfortable by modern standards. Springs hadn't been invented yet, mattresses sagged, feather beds clumped, and pests were still a nightmare. You might have a bed that looked like a Baroque wedding cake, but sleeping in it was another story. So let's zoom out for a moment. Across cultures, beds in the 17th and 18th century reveal the same pattern, the eternal struggle between comfort and practicality. Rich people turned beds into status symbols. Poor people turned them into survival tools. Everyone, regardless of class, dealt with pests, drafts, and the occasional snoring bedmate. But beds kept evolving, slowly, incrementally, toward the idea that sleeping should actually be comfortable, toward the radical notion that maybe, just maybe, rest was as important as work. So in the next part, we'll float gently into the 19th century, industrialization, mass production, the invention of the bed spring, and of course, the rise of the mattress industry as we know it today. Spoiler, advertising will play a big role, because nothing sells better than the promise of a good night's sleep.
All right, so we've shuffled our way out of the 18th century, past all the feather beds, curtained alcoves, and noblemen treating bedtime like a royal performance. By the 1800s, the world was changing fast. Industrialization was kicking into gear, cities were booming, trains were rattling across the countryside, and even beds, humble, everyday beds, were swept up in the tidal wave of modernity. Now, on the surface, beds might not seem like an industrial revolution product. They're not as flashy as steam engines or factories, but comfort, it turns out, sells just as well as coal. Maybe better if you think about how often people were waking up cranky with back pain. Let's start with one of the biggest game changers, the introduction of springs. Around the early 19th century, manufacturers began experimenting with metal coil springs in furniture, first in chairs, then in sofas, and eventually, by the mid-1800s, in mattresses. This was revolutionary. Before springs, a mattress was basically a glorified sack of stuffing. Feathers, wool, horsehair, straw, whatever you had, you shoved inside. Comfortable for about 5 minutes, then lumpy forever. Springs, on the other hand, promised resilience. They gave a mattress bounce. They spread out weight. They didn't compress into a sad pancake after a year. Suddenly, beds were evolving from static lumps into something dynamic, something that actually worked with your body instead of against it. Of course, at first, spring mattresses were expensive. Only the wealthy could afford them. But as industrial production scaled up, costs dropped, and middle-class families began to see spring beds as the new standard of comfort. Slowly, the feather mattress was dethroned. Poor geese everywhere sighed in relief. Now, speaking of industrialization, let's talk about mass production. For most of history, beds were handmade. Carpenters built frames, local upholsterers stuffed mattresses. Everything was bespoke, or at least small scale. By the 19th century, factories were churning out bed frames and mattresses in bulk. That meant two big things: consistency and affordability. Suddenly, more people could own a proper bed. Not just nobles or wealthy merchants, but shopkeepers, clerks, even some factory workers. And with this democratization of bedding came another new obsession: hygiene. Because if there's one thing the Victorians were obsessed with, it was cleanliness. The 19th century was the great age of germ theory, eventually anyway, and with it came a new awareness that sharing beds with lice, fleas, and bedbugs maybe wasn't the best lifestyle choice. Doctors and health reformers began promoting the idea that a clean bed was essential to a healthy body. Beds were redesigned to be easier to clean. Iron and brass bed frames became fashionable, partly because they didn't harbor pests like wooden frames did. You couldn't get bed bugs out of a carved oak four-poster without declaring war, but a sleek iron frame? Much harder for critters to hide in. Practical and stylish. And for once, practicality became trendy. By the late 1800s, heavy drapes and curtains around beds were fading out of fashion, replaced by lighter, more minimal designs. Less fabric meant fewer hiding places for bugs, and fewer bugs meant fewer midnight itching sessions. It went all around. Meanwhile, on the cultural side of things, beds were becoming more private. Remember how in the Renaissance and Baroque eras, nobles would hold entire audiences from their beds? By the 19th century, that was passé. Bedrooms were shifting into more personal, intimate spaces. The middle-class Victorian home emphasized separate rooms for separate activities. Parlors were for visitors, dining rooms for meals, bedrooms for sleeping. Radical, I know. This shift was fueled by changing attitudes towards privacy and family life. Industrial work separated the spheres of public and domestic more sharply than before. And the bed, once a stage for politics and ceremony, became a sanctuary of rest. Or, in the case of Victorian couples, a sanctuary where one person snored loudly while the other plotted revenge. Of course, the Victorians also had their quirks. For example, deathbeds. The 19th century had a strange fixation on the idea of the good death. Dying at home, in bed, surrounded by loved ones, was considered the ideal. Families sometimes even took post-mortem photographs of deceased relatives posed peacefully in their beds. Grim? Yes, but in the Victorian imagination, the bed wasn't just where life paused each night, it was where life itself ended. Beds were also tied up in morality. Advice manuals of the period contained long passages on proper sleeping habits. Not too soft, or you'd ruin your spine. Not too many blankets, or you'd overheat and weaken your constitution. Sleep hygiene, Victorian style, basically meant suffering just the right amount to prove you were virtuous. Meanwhile, the mattress industry was booming. Companies sprang up across Europe and America, each promising the secret to a better night's sleep. Some pushed horsehair mattresses as the ultimate hygiene option. Others swore by cotton batting. Springs were advertised as modern miracles, distributing weight evenly and protecting your delicate Victorian bones. And let's not underestimate the power of advertising. By the late 1800s, companies were producing glossy catalogs, showing happy families snoozing peacefully on their products. Sleep was no longer just a biological necessity, it was a consumer experience. And the mattress was the centerpiece. This was also the golden age of patents. Inventors rushed to patent new spring designs, new stuffing combinations, new frame mechanisms. Adjustable beds even made early appearances, marketed as health aids. If you think late-night infomercials invented the gimmicky sleep product, think again. The Victorians were already there, hawking scientifically designed mattresses to anyone with disposable income. Now, let's step outside the factories and advertising halls for a moment. What was sleep really like for ordinary people in the 19th century? For many, it was still rough. Working-class families often crammed into small apartments, with multiple children sharing beds or sleeping on pallets on the floor. Industrial housing wasn't exactly luxurious. Ventilation was poor, crowding was extreme, and while iron and brass bed frames were more hygienic, they weren't always affordable. But even so, the spread of mass-produced bedding meant that more people than ever had access to actual mattresses, sheets, and blankets. Sleep quality may not have skyrocketed, but the idea of what a normal bed looked like was shifting. The dream of a proper, comfortable bed was becoming mainstream. There's another interesting 19th century trend worth mentioning: the obsession with posture. Medical reformers worried endlessly about what bed surfaces did to the body. Too soft, or you'd risk spinal deformities. Too hard, or you'd wake up stiff and miserable. Somewhere in between was the sweet spot. But since no one could agree on where that sweet spot was, mattress makers capitalized on the debate, selling products for every preference. You had orthopedic mattresses long before the word really meant anything. You had sanitary beds stuffed with horsehair, because apparently that was the least offensive material. You had adjustable supports for invalids, since long-term bed rest was considered proper medical treatment for almost anything. Basically, if you were sick, injured, or just vaguely Victorian, the doctor's advice was often, stay in bed for weeks. Which sounds restful until you remember the mattress was full of horsehair and weighed as much as your neighbor's horse. And then there was the railway. Train travel became increasingly common in the 19th century, and with it came the rise of sleeper cars. George Pullman in the United States designed luxurious sleeper trains where passengers could rest on bunks or fold out beds while chugging across the country. This was a new frontier for beds, portable, public, and stacked in neat little rows. Pullman cars weren't exactly private. Curtains separated bunks, but you were still sharing space with dozens of strangers. Yet, compared to the alternative, sitting upright for days, they were a miracle. Sleep, once confined to homes and inns, was becoming mobile. The bed itself was being reimagined for a modern industrial world. So let's gather this all together. The 19th century was the turning point. Beds transformed from handmade, lumpy artifacts into industrial products, marketed to the masses. Springs revolutionized mattresses. Iron frames improved hygiene. Privacy redefined bedrooms. And the mattress industry began its long, relentless campaign to convince us that buying their product was the key to happiness. By the time the century ended, the foundations of modern sleep culture were firmly in place. But things were only going to get stranger in the 20th century, because once advertising, psychology, and consumer culture got their hands on the humble bed, sleep itself became a battleground. Which is exactly where we'll drift next: the world of 20th century mattresses. Memory foam, waterbeds, and enough sleep gimmicks to keep insomniacs awake forever. So here we are, drifting into the 20th century. The factories are humming, the trains are running, and everyone is finally starting to expect that a bed should actually be comfortable, instead of vaguely coffin-adjacent. The 19th century gave us springs, iron frames, and the birth of mattress marketing. The 20th century? Oh, that's when sleep officially became big business. Because here's the thing, industrialization gave people more choices. And with choices came competition. And with competition came advertising. And with advertising came, well, let's just say some very creative claims about what a mattress could do for your health, your marriage, and even your personality. Yes, friends, welcome to the golden age of mattress hype. Let's start with springs, since they were still the star of the show. By the early 1900s, inner spring mattresses were becoming mainstream. Factories were churning them out faster and cheaper than ever. Companies touted them as the ultimate blend of comfort and support. Ads claimed they would prevent back pain, cure insomnia, and basically fix your entire life. Because of course they did. And while springs weren't a miracle cure for everything from gout to heartbreak, they were a genuine improvement. Compared to saggy straw ticks or lumpy feather beds, inner springs distributed weight more evenly. They had a pleasant bounce. They felt modern. And in a world obsessed with progress, cars, electricity, telephones, why not add scientifically designed mattress to the list? But let's not pretend they were flawless. Early spring mattresses could squeak, sag, or poke you with rogue coils. And if you've ever slept on a cheap motel bed where the springs feel like medieval torture devices, Congratulations, you've experienced the less glamorous side of early 20th century innovation. Now, while the technology was important, the real story of 20th century beds is in the marketing. This was the century when advertising took over every corner of life, and mattress companies weren't going to miss their chance. They plastered newspapers and magazines with dreamy illustrations of happy couples snoozing away on clouds of springs. They ran slogans promising perfect rest and scientific sleep. They even brought doctors into the mix, sometimes actual physicians, sometimes actors in white coats, endorsing their brand as the healthiest choice. The message was clear. Your mattress wasn't just furniture. It was the foundation of your health, your productivity, and your emotional well-being. If you weren't thriving, maybe it was because you hadn't bought the right mattress. Sound familiar? Yeah, mattress ads haven't really changed. They've just swapped the drawings for stock photos and added sleep science jargon. And then came the celebrities. By the mid-20th century, companies were using famous figures to endorse their products. Movie stars, athletes, even politicians were photographed lounging on mattresses to prove they were modern, stylish, and sophisticated. Because if Clark Gable looked good on a spring bed, surely you would too. It was all part of the great mid-century sales pitch. Sleep not just as a necessity, but as a lifestyle. Your bed wasn't just where you collapsed at night, it was where you proved your taste, your health, and your middle-class respectability. Of course, the 20th century also loved a good gimmick, and few gimmicks became as iconic or as ridiculous as the waterbed. Let's talk about that. The modern waterbed was invented in the 1960s, though early prototypes go back further. The idea was simple. Instead of springs or stuffing, why not fill a giant vinyl bladder with water? The result was a bed that shifted and rippled with every your movement. Supposedly, it provided perfect support by molding to your body. In reality, it also made you feel like you were sleeping on a very large, very judgmental water balloon. Waterbeds became a cultural phenomenon in the 1970s and 80s. They were marketed as futuristic, sexy, and even therapeutic. Ads promised they would relieve pressure points, improve circulation, and, wink wink, enhance your romantic life. Entire showrooms were filled with groovy waterbed displays, sometimes surrounded by lava lamps for maximum effect. Were they comfortable? Opinions varied. Some people swore by them. Others found the sloshing sensation nauseating. Temperature control was also an issue. You had to heat the water or risk sleeping on what felt like a refrigerated swimming pool. And heaven help you if the bed sprang a leak. Many an apartment carpet was ruined by an ill-fated waterbed experiment. But for a while, waterbeds were everywhere. By the 1980s, they made up a significant chunk of mattress sales in the United States. And then, just as quickly, they faded. Too bulky, too impractical, too damp. Like disco, they became a relic of a very specific cultural moment. Meanwhile, the mainstream mattress industry kept refining their spring models. By the mid-20th century, companies were experimenting with different coil designs. Bonnell, offset, continuous. If you've never heard those words before, don't worry. The important thing is that mattress makers wanted you to believe that the exact shape of the spring was the difference between blissful slumber and lifelong agony. Box springs also became standard in this era. These were wooden frames filled with coils placed under the mattress to absorb shock and add height. Together, the mattress and box spring formed the modern sleep set, which sounds like a video game expansion pack, but really just meant you needed to buy twice as many things. Now, we can't talk about the 20th century without mentioning foam. Foam padding began showing up in mattresses in the mid-20th century, offering extra cushioning on top of springs. But the real revolution came later, in the 1960s, when NASA developed viscoelastic polyurethane foam, better known as memory foam. It was originally designed for aircraft seats to absorb shock. Eventually, someone realized it also made a pretty decent mattress material. Memory foam mattresses didn't really hit the consumer market until the 1990s, but when they did, they were billed as the ultimate in space-age comfort. They molded to your body, they reduced pressure points, They absorbed motion so you wouldn't feel your partner tossing and turning. Ads often showed people pressing their hands into the foam and watching the imprint slowly fade, as if the bed was literally remembering them. Creepy, maybe. Effective, definitely. Of course, memory foam also had its downsides. It trapped heat. Early versions had a distinct chemical smell, and some people complained that sinking into the foam felt more like quicksand than comfort. Still, it became one of the most popular mattress innovations of the late 20th century, paving the way for today's endless foam mattress companies. Meanwhile, cultural attitudes towards sleep were also shifting. In the early 20th century, sleep was often seen as something slightly shameful, lazy, unproductive, a waste of time. Industrial culture glorified long work hours. Early risers were praised as virtuous, while late sleepers were scolded as moral failures. And mattress ads, in turn, tried to thread the needle. Sleep was important, yes, but only because it made you more efficient during the day. By the late 20th centuries, though, sleep was being rebranded as self-care. Doctors emphasized the health risks of chronic fatigue. Psychologists studied dreams. New Age movements encouraged people to explore altered states of consciousness through rest and relaxation. And the mattress industry, ever opportunistic, happily leaned into these trends. A good mattress wasn't just about preventing back pain, it was about achieving wellness, enlightenment, and possibly a better love life. Hotels also played a role in shaping modern mattress culture. As travel expanded in the 20th century, hotels began competing not just on location or amenities, but on the quality of their beds. Chains like Hilton and Marriott advertised luxury sleep as part of their brand. Some even partnered with mattress companies to create signature beds. If you've ever slept in a hotel, loved the mattress, and then discovered you could buy the exact same model for your home, congratulations. You've been caught in the great hotel mattress marketing machine. Air travel even joined the game. Long-haul flights introduced reclining seats, then lie-flat beds in first class. Suddenly, sleep was a premium service you could purchase at 30,000 feet. Beds were no longer confined to the home. They were mobile luxuries, accessible to anyone with enough frequent flyer miles. So, let's take stock of the century. The 20th century gave us inner-spring dominance, the rise and fall of waterbeds, the space-age arrival of memory foam, and a relentless barrage of advertising convincing us that happiness itself depended on buying the right mattress. Beds became personal sanctuaries, health aids, lifestyle statements, and sometimes expensive puddles when the waterbed heater broke. By the time the 21st century dawned, the bed had officially completed its transformation from medieval drafty box to high-tech consumer product. But of course, history doesn't stop. Which brings us to the present era, where the mattress industry has reinvented itself yet again, this time with bed-in-a-box startups, smartphone sleep trackers, and the ever-looming question of whether any of us are actually sleeping better.
All right, so here we are in the 21st century, the digital age, selfies, TikTok, and a general obsession with tracking every bodily function, including sleep. The humble bed, after centuries of evolution, has officially entered the era of tech, convenience, and hyper-consumerism. If the 20th century was about springs, foam, and waterbeds, the 21st century is about boxes. Compressed boxes delivered to your doorstep, apps that tell you whether you're snoring correctly, and marketing so pervasive it makes early 20th century mattress hype look quaint. Let's start with the phenomenon that's arguably changed mattress culture more than anything else in decades, the bed in a box. Around 2010, startups began compressing mattresses, rolling them up, and shipping them in cardboard boxes. Suddenly, buying a mattress didn't require schlepping a king-size frame to your car, hiring a truck, or bribing 3 friends to help carry it upstairs. You could literally unbox your new bed in your pajamas. Convenience meet sleep. These compressed mattresses are typically foam or hybrid foam spring constructions. Foam compresses easily, springs not so much, so hybrids became popular.
And while the idea sounds modern, it's really just the latest step in a centuries-long trend, making sleep accessible, comfortable, and, of course, marketable. Bed-in-a-box companies also leaned heavily on social media. Ads feature smiling couples collapsing dramatically onto their new mattress, text overlays promising the best sleep of your life, and hashtags like #DreamBig or #SleepGoals, which is impressive marketing, if a bit exhausting to read at 2 a.m. while you scroll. Next up, smart beds. These are beds with sensors, motors, apps, and occasionally AI. They track how long you sleep, how often you toss and turn, and sometimes even adjust the mattress firmness automatically. Some come with climate control to heat or cool different sides of the bed. Others connect to your smartphone to wake you with gentle vibrations instead of an alarm. In other words, your bed is now judging you constantly. If you snore too much, toss too often, or fail to meet your optimal sleep score, the app will let you know, because apparently sleeping wrong is now quantifiable, trackable failure. And let's not forget about adjustable beds. No longer confined to hospital use or luxury suites, these beds allow you to elevate your head, feet, or both with the push of a button. Perfect for reading in bed, watching Netflix, or pretending your mild acid reflux is a serious medical condition. Of course, all this innovation comes with a cultural shift. Sleep in the 21st century is simultaneously more comfortable and more anxiety-inducing than ever before. People obsess over bed brands, thread counts, pillow loft, and whether a weighted blanket will fix their insomnia. Wellness influencers post videos of elaborate bedtime routines that look more like spa rituals than sleep preparation. Sleep itself has become a status symbol. You're not just resting, you are performing rest, which in some ways echoes earlier centuries. Remember Louis XIV, who turned getting into bed into a ceremonial display? Or Victorian ads promoting scientific sleep? In the 21st century, we're just doing it with Instagram captions and Bluetooth sensors. Let's also talk about mattress materials, because the options today are staggering. Memory foam is still a big player, offering pressure relief and motion isolation. Latex foam has a loyal following, prized for its durability and natural materials. Hybrid mattresses combine foam and springs, aiming to give you the best of both worlds. Then there are eco-friendly options with organic cotton, coconut core, or recycled plastics. And yes, some even claim antimicrobial or hypoallergenic properties, because if your mattress doesn't fight invisible germs, what's even the point? Mattresses today are also customizable. Some companies allow you to pick firmness on each side of the bed. Others send you multiple layers of foam to assemble yourself. You can have a bed as firm as a rock, as soft as a cloud, or somewhere in between, all without ever leaving your living room. The obsession with comfort has reached heights that would make 19th century Victorians blush. Meanwhile, hotels continue to shape sleep expectations. Boutique hotels and luxury chains compete to create the perfect bed, often consulting sleep scientists, ergonomists, and marketing teams. Some even sell their proprietary mattresses to guests afterward, which explains why you've stayed somewhere once, loved the bed, and then spent the next 3 months scouring the internet for a mattress that somehow replicates it. Air travel has also upped the ante. Lie-flat seats in business and first class mimic the comforts of home, with memory foam cushions, adjustable firmness, and climate control. Sleep is no longer confined to bedrooms. It's a mobile luxury. Airports, trains, and even spacecraft consider how to optimize your sleep for performance and comfort. The modern bed is no longer just furniture, it's infrastructure. The wellness industry has also co-opted sleep completely. Mattresses are now sold alongside pillows, weighted blankets, sleep trackers, and apps promising circadian rhythm optimization. Sleep challenges, Instagram reels, and TikTok trends encourage better sleep hygiene,
or at least the appearance of it. And mattress companies are happy to capitalize. Some brands now market anti-snore or temperature-regulated models as part of a broader health lifestyle. This is a huge leap from the days of straw ticks and feather sacks. Sleep is no longer merely survival, it's luxury, performance, and self-improvement all rolled into one. And yet, for all the innovation, some things remain eternal. We still argue over bed-sharing arrangements, just like families did centuries ago. We still curse at partners who snore. We still dread the occasional night spent on a lumpy hotel mattress. And we still, after all this technological progress, value the simple pleasure of a comfortable, warm, private place to lie down. The 21st century bed is more than a consumer product. It's a symbol of centuries of human obsession with rest, comfort, and status. It reflects culture, technology, and even psychology. And while we may have smart beds, bed-in-a-box startups, and apps analyzing our every twitch, the fundamental goal is the same as it's always been: sleep, and maybe just a bit of comfort along the way. So, let's take a step back. From the piles of grass used by early humans, to the gilded four-posters of Louis XIV, to the spring mattresses, waterbeds, and memory foam of the modern era, beds have evolved alongside us. They've mirrored our culture, our technology, and our quirks. They've been status symbols, wellness tools, and occasionally sources of immense frustration. And the story isn't over. New materials, smart beds, and sleep innovations continue to push the boundaries. Maybe one day we'll have beds that adjust temperature, firmness, and humidity automatically, monitor our dreams, and even gently wake us when our circadian rhythm peaks. Or maybe we'll just keep buying slightly better foam and complaining about our partner snoring. Either way, the human obsession with sleep remains as old and persistent as the hills, as strangely compelling as ever.
So here we are, finally, lying back in our metaphorical bed and letting history settle around us like a soft, familiar blanket. Over the past several parts, we've drifted from piles of grass and prehistoric caves to gilded four-posters, lumpy feather mattresses, squeaky springs, wobbly waterbeds, and the sleek, app-connected sleep gadgets of today. And if you're anything like me, your eyelids might be growing heavy just picturing all of it. That's good. That's the point. Because beds are more than furniture. They are mirrors of human life, culture, and desire. They reflect our values, our technology, and our social structures. The story of beds is the story of humanity itself. Think back for a moment to early humans, carefully arranging grasses for comfort. It seems simple, almost mundane, but that small act, creating a softer place to rest, to recover, to dream, was revolutionary. It speaks to the eternal human impulse to seek rest, safety, and a little bit of luxury, even in a harsh, unpredictable world. From there, beds evolved with civilization. Egyptians raised their wooden frames, both for comfort and status. Greeks and Romans reclined on couches for meals and philosophical musings, turning sleep spaces into social stages. Medieval Europeans slept on straw pallets or four-poster thrones with curtains, negotiating drafts, pests, and family members sharing the same mattress. Across the world, Japanese futons, Chinese kang beds, and Indian charpais offered clever, climate-conscious alternatives. Each culture adapted its sleeping habits to environment, technology, and social norms. Then came the Renaissance and early modern periods, when beds became art, ceremony, and political theater. Louis XIV treated the act of climbing into bed as a public spectacle. Feather mattresses, gilt frames, and elaborate drapery signaled status and taste. Meanwhile, ordinary people still contended with lumpy pallets and communal sleeping arrangements. In every era, The bed reflected inequality as much as comfort. By the 19th century, industrialization transformed beds yet again. Springs, iron frames, and mass production brought more people into the fold of decent sleep. Hygiene, previously optional, became a selling point. Manuals and advertisements shaped ideas of proper sleeping postures. Hotels and trains expanded the domain of sleep, bringing mattresses outside the home. Beds were no longer just places to collapse. They were tools, symbols, and commodities. The 20th and 21st centuries brought innovation, marketing, and a dash of absurdity. Waterbeds, memory foam, bed-in-a-box startups, and smart beds turned sleep into a technological and consumer spectacle. Advertising promises transformed mattresses from practical objects into pathways to health, happiness, and status. Apps monitor our every movement, and some beds even adjust their shape or temperature automatically. Comfort, once a luxury, is now a quantified science. And yet, despite all these gadgets, we still share the same basic human desire, a place to rest, dream, and briefly escape the world. What's striking is how certain patterns endure. Humans always crave comfort. Even a small pile of grass or straw was better than a bare floor. Beds reflect social hierarchies. From royal four-posters to cramped apartments, where you sleep often tells a story about who you are. Sleep rituals matter. Ceremonial or private, simple or complex, bedtime has always been a marker of culture and identity. Pests, drafts, and lumpy mattresses remain persistent annoyances. Despite centuries of innovation, the struggle for ideal sleep never fully disappears. The bed is both intimate and public. It shapes our bodies, minds, and relationships. It is a place of rest, work, play, and sometimes even political or social performance. Across millennia, it has evolved from a pile of grass to a smart, self-adjusting technology, yet its fundamental purpose remains unchanged: to cradle us while we pause, recharge, and dream. And so, as you listen to this, perhaps lying on your own mattress, whatever kind it may be, consider the lineage beneath you. You are connected to prehistoric humans, Egyptian nobles, Renaissance courtiers, Victorian reformers, and 21st century tech enthusiasts. All of them had one thing in common: a desire to rest well, to sleep, and to recover from the day. Think of the textures beneath you, the soft give of your mattress, the coolness or warmth of your sheets, the gentle rise and fall of the bed with your breathing. For thousands of years, humans have sought the same simple comfort. And while the form and fashion of beds have changed, the essence has not. So, let's close gently. Dim the lights if you haven't already. Adjust your pillows. Sink a little deeper into your mattress. Think of the generations of sleepers who have gone before you, the early humans arranging their grasses, the kings surrounded by gilded curtains, the travelers and rolling inns, the Victorians worrying over horsehair and hygiene, and the modern innovators perfecting foam and springs. You are part of this continuum, and tonight you can rest knowing that your bed, in all its modern complexity, is the culmination of thousands of years of human ingenuity, curiosity, and the simple, persistent longing for comfort. Sleep is the same story told in different materials across different eras. And as you drift off, let the knowledge soothe you. Every mattress you've ever lain on, every bed you will lie on, is part of a story that is as old as humanity itself. Good night. Sleep well. So, if you've been following along, you now know a lot about beds. From prehistoric straw piles to gilded thrones, from Victorian iron frames to smartphone mattresses that track your every twitch, humanity has never stopped obsessing over sleep. But beyond comfort and commerce, beds have also been mirrors of culture, psychology, and even the human spirit. Let's float slowly into that idea. Think about it. Beds are where humans are most vulnerable. We shed our armor, our work clothes, our public personas. We curl up, close our eyes, and trust that the world will wait while we recover. That simple act of vulnerability has always been deeply human. Perhaps this is why beds, throughout history, were so often entwined with power. Kings displayed their beds as symbols of authority. Families shared beds for warmth, protection, or necessity. Beds were sites of intimacy, ritual, and sometimes even political theater. Sleep is also the closest thing we have to time travel. When we lie down, our consciousness drifts into a world entirely of its own making. Dreams, mysterious, ephemeral, and sometimes unsettling, connect us to a realm that cannot be directly observed. Across centuries, people have used beds as stages for both literal and figurative journeys. The sick resting on their mattresses, the lovers entwined in secrecy, the philosophers pondering life while half asleep, the nobles performing ceremony in velvet and silk. Let's linger on the psychological aspect for a moment. Throughout history, humans have associated beds with both safety and anxiety. Medieval peasants feared pests. Renaissance courtiers feared public humiliation if their bed was inadequately adorned. Victorian reformers worried about posture and morality. Modern consumers fret over whether their mattress is right for their health, their sleep quality, or even their social image. In every era, the bed has been both a sanctuary and a source of preoccupation. And yet, sleep always wins. Despite discomfort, drafty rooms, pests, or the judgmental gaze of an app, humans lie down, close their eyes, and surrender to rest. It's a quiet rebellion against chaos, a small assertion of control over one's own body and mind. Beds also tell us something about time. Consider the evolution we've traced, from simple straw heaps to smart foam hybrids. Each innovation reflects the broader society, the technologies available, the cultural priorities, and even the economic hierarchies of the day. A Roman triclinium was a bed for multiple purposes: eating, lounging, entertaining. A Victorian feather bed was simultaneously luxurious, hygienic, and moral. A 21st century bed-in-a-box embodies convenience, marketing, and data-driven optimization. The bed is a lens through which we can view the values of an era. And yet, the essence remains the same. Humans have always wanted to rest, to recover, and to dream. Now let's drift gently into the social dimension. Shared beds have been a fact of life for most humans throughout history. Families, servants, travelers, and even royalty often slept cheek to cheek. Modern culture, especially in the West, emphasizes privacy, personal space, and separate bedrooms. But at its core, the act of lying close to another human is deeply human. Warmth, proximity, and companionship have always been part of sleep's appeal. In a way, the evolution of the bed mirrors the evolution of social norms. The more private and specialized the sleeping space, the more complex human relationships became. Even today, bed sharing, whether between partners, parents and children, or friends traveling together, carries echoes of millennia of human behavior. Sleep is communal and yet intensely personal. It is the only time we are fully ourselves without any performance. And finally, let's touch on the philosophical side. If beds are mirrors of human history, then sleep is a mirror of human existence. It is a pause in the relentless forward march of life. It reminds us that we are mortal, finite, and in need of restoration. Beds provide a sanctuary, a safe harbor in which we surrender control, and in doing so, we affirm one of the oldest truths of humanity, that life is lived both in action and in rest. Every mattress you've ever lain on, every bed you've ever shared or abandoned,
is part of a continuum that stretches back to prehistoric grass piles and forward into the unknown future of sleep technology. Perhaps one day, humans will sleep on levitating beds, beds that monitor brain waves, or beds that adjust dynamically to dreams. And yet, the essence will remain. A place to lie down, close your eyes, and let the world fade. So, as you settle into your own bed tonight, think about this journey. Think about the prehistoric humans gathering grass. Think about the Egyptians and their wooden frames. Think about Renaissance courts, Victorian featherbeds, waterbeds, and smart foam hybrids. You are part of that lineage. Every time you rest, you are participating in a history as old as humanity itself. And as you drift off, let the quiet comfort of your bed remind you that sleep is not just necessary, it is sacred, timeless, and shared across the centuries. Close your eyes, breathe slowly, feel the rise and fall of your body against your mattress, and know that you are part of a long, strange, and beautiful story. Good night, sleep well, dream gently.
Now, let's just lie back for a while, in our imagination, if not in reality, and let the story of beds and sleep carry us gently toward rest. No facts, no lists, just the calm reflection of all we've explored. Consider it a historical lullaby. Picture yourself sinking into a soft mattress. Feel it cradle your body evenly, just as a Roman triclinium once supported a noble's reclining form, or as a Victorian featherbed supported generations of families. The springs beneath you hum quietly, almost imperceptibly, like the whisper of centuries of sleepers who have lain where you lie. Imagine the beds of the past all around you, softly layered in time. Prehistoric grasses arranged by hands that no longer exist. Egyptian wooden frames polished smooth by artisans. Renaissance velvet and silk fading slightly in the light of memory. A featherbed laced with gold thread sagging gently in the weight of history. The gentle sway of a 20th century waterbed lapping in memory. And finally, your modern mattress, soft, resilient, comforting. Every layer is a whisper of human experience, each mattress a story, each bed a reflection of life. And now, you are a part of it. Breathe slowly, in and out. Think of all the people who have rested here, in some form, across millennia. Lovers, rulers, laborers, travelers, dreamers, the sick, the healthy, the young, the old. Their worries and their joys, their hopes and their mundane thoughts, all softened by the simple act of lying down. They are your companions now, quiet and still, sharing this eternal human ritual. Sleep has always been a gentle equalizer. Everyone, regardless of wealth, status, or circumstance, experiences it. And every bed, from the most modest straw pile to the most luxurious memory foam hybrid, carries the same purpose: restoration, calm, and a brief pause from the relentless march of life. Let your thoughts drift over the centuries. Feel the shift from communal sleeping arrangements to private sanctuaries, from the ceremonial public beds of monarchs to the personalized, technology-driven beds of today. Notice the constant human desire for comfort, for safety, for warmth. Notice the evolution of material and design, but also the constancy of purpose. Rest is rest, and it always has been. Your body presses gently into your mattress. Your breath flows evenly.
The world outside your bed grows distant. The clamor of daily life, the digital noise, the minor worries, all fade into a quiet hum. You're lying in a space that centuries of humans have dreamed about, imagined improvements upon, and finally perfected in your hands or under your body. Consider this. No matter the century, no matter the material, the bed has been a silent witness to human history. It has supported kings, queens, peasants, travelers, and dreamers. It has been a stage, a sanctuary, and a tool, and tonight it is your sanctuary. Feel your muscles soften. Your eyelids grow heavier. Every inch of your body is supported, cradled, and cared for. And just like all the sleepers before you, you allow yourself to drift, slowly, smoothly, securely. Let the story of beds carry you into dreams. Perhaps you drift back to a straw bed in a prehistoric cave, the fire flickering nearby. Perhaps you float past a Renaissance canopy, velvet curtains swaying softly in the breeze. Perhaps you lie upon a featherbed mattress, sun streaming through tall windows. Perhaps you even visit a futuristic foam mattress, perfectly molded to your shape, quietly monitoring your comfort. All of these times and places exist in your mind, softly layered like the mattress beneath you. And as you drift between them, you rest. Good night. Sleep well. Let the centuries of beds cradle you. Let the whispers of past sleepers soothe you, and let yourself be fully, completely, peacefully at rest.
Now let's linger a little longer, floating even further into quiet. There is nothing to do here but rest. No facts, no lists, no schedules. Only the gentle, unbroken story of sleep, whispered across the centuries. Picture yourself lying in your bed. Perhaps your blanket folds softly around you. Perhaps your pillow cradles your head just so. Feel the weight of your body being evenly supported. The mattress beneath you responds with a gentle, welcoming give, a reminder that this moment, this very breath, this very stillness is yours. Imagine drifting through history as you lie there. You pass through prehistoric fields where grasses were gathered carefully to make a simple, comforting bed. You float past the wooden frames of ancient Egypt, polished by hands long gone. You see Renaissance velvet and silk fluttering gently in the imaginary breeze of a sunlit chamber. You pass through Victorian featherbeds, inner springs, and waterbeds, each one a marker of human desire for comfort and rest. And finally, you arrive here, in your modern bed, where everything you need to rest well is already under you, around you, supporting you. Breathe slowly, in and out. Feel the rise and fall of your chest. Notice the steady rhythm of your heartbeat, a gentle reminder that life continues, but that right now you are safe, you are still, and you are at peace. Every bed you've ever slept on, every mattress ever invented, every blanket ever folded has led to this moment, the perfect, still embrace of rest. Think of all the people who have slept before you, all the human bodies that have pressed against straw, feathers, springs, and foam. They dreamed, they rested, they recovered. And now, in this quiet moment, you join them. You are part of the continuum of sleep,
the endless chain of human beings finding rest beneath layers of comfort. Let your thoughts float. Perhaps you drift to a starlit night in prehistory. Perhaps you glide past a candlelit chamber in the Renaissance, or a sun-drenched Victorian bedroom. Perhaps you hover above a 20th century waterbed, feeling the slow swish of water beneath you. Perhaps you sense the quiet hum of a 21st century foam mattress, perfectly molded to your body, monitoring nothing except your comfort. All of these layers coexist in your mind. All of these beds have existed so that you can rest here, now, in safety and warmth. Let yourself drift between them, lightly, softly, without effort. Sleep has always been this gentle surrender. It is a pause in time, a letting go, a quiet bridge between yesterday and tomorrow. Every culture, every century has honored it in its own way. Beds have been status symbols, tools of hygiene, technological marvels, even public theaters of ceremony. But at their core, they have always done the same thing: support the body, cradle the mind, and allow humans to dream. And you, lying here, are part of that timeless tradition. Let it soothe you. Let it remind you that for centuries, humans have found comfort exactly where you are now. You are not alone in this. You are resting as all humans have rested. Good night. Sink deeper. Breathe evenly. Let every thought soften and blur. The past, the present, the imagined future, all converge in this moment of rest. The mattresses of history, the whispers of centuries, the calm knowledge that sleep is eternal, they are all here with you now. And as you drift completely, let the quiet carry you. Let the soft embrace of your bed hold you, and let the gentle rhythm of your own breath remind you that you are safe, you are still, and you are at peace. Sleep. Dream. Rest.
Now, let's sink completely into stillness. No history, no lists, no comparisons, just the present moment, the quiet weight of your body, and the gentle embrace of your bed. You've traveled through centuries, through straw, feathers, springs, waterbeds, foam, and smart technology. And now, you are here. Feel the mattress beneath you, supporting every curve, every joint, every inch of your body. Feel the blanket or sheet that wraps around you like a soft whisper. Feel your pillow cradling your head, holding your thoughts gently so they do not disturb you. Breathe slowly, in and out. With each breath, let your body sink deeper. Let your muscles release tension one by one. Your toes soften. Your calves loosen. Your thighs relax. Your back melts into the mattress. Your shoulders drop. Your arms grow heavy. Your hands are still. Your neck relaxes. Your jaw softens. Your eyelids grow heavier, softer, heavier. Every part of you is supported. Every part of you is safe. Every part of you belongs in this quiet moment. Think back briefly to all the sleepers you've imagined along the journey. Prehistoric hewns in grassy nests, Egyptian nobles on polished wood, Renaissance courtiers on velvet, Victorian families in feathered beds, travelers in waterbeds, modern humans on memory foam. All of them drifting into rest. All of them surrendering to sleep. And now, you join them. Your place in history, like theirs, is simple: to lie down, to breathe, and to rest. Sleep connects us across time, across centuries, across the world. It is the same soft, vital, sustaining act that has cradled humans for millennia. And tonight, in this quiet moment, it cradles you. Let your thoughts float, gently, like leaves drifting on a still pond. Do not chase them, do not hold them, watch them pass and fade. Each thought, each memory, each tiny worry drifts away like clouds in a calm sky. And with every exhale, you sink deeper, softer, slower. Time loses importance. The past, the present, and the imagined future all fold together into one serene moment. Here, now, is the only place that matters. Here is your bed, your breath, your rest. Good night. Sleep well. Dream freely. Feel the weight of centuries of sleepers beneath you, supporting you, accompanying you, reminding you that rest is sacred, timeless, and universal. Every bed you have ever slept on, every mattress ever designed, every soft or lumpy surface that has held human life, it has led to this moment. And in this moment, you are safe. You are calm. You are completely at rest. Let yourself drift now, fully and completely. Breathe in and out. Feel the stillness. Feel the calm. Feel the gentle, eternal rhythm of sleep itself, and let it carry you.